In this video, we'll discuss the facial features on Kurt Cobain's face that point to an unsettled and lost spirit and aspects of his constitutional strength. Enjoy. Hey there, good people. Welcome back to another face reading episode. Today we've got Kurt Cobain. So if you're new to my channel, please go watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. It's a very important video if you've never seen a face reading so you can understand what face reading is and isn't. And if you're liking my content, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification. So when we talk about Kurt Cobain, for those of you who don't know, he was the lead singer of Nirvana. And I was born in 81. And in the 90s, Kurt Cobain was rising to fame. Very talented guy. He was a heartthrob. Women were in love with him. Very handsome guy and very talented. And tragically committed suicide violently too. It involved a shotgun. Shot himself. It was really, really sad. And I remember hearing about it when I was a kid, and it was just a really tragic story. You know, suicide in any capacity, excuse me, when someone has this much fame and this much talent, to see someone go like this is always heartbreaking. So when I look at his face and I was compiling the pictures and looking at him, I try to focus on the dominant things that leap out. You know, you can break someone's face down and spend a lot of time, but I was brought back to how dominant his Shen was. The spirit, the anima that comes out of a person's face. And when we talk about Shen, the thing we want to think about is, ultimately, if we make it as simple as possible, it's the look in someone's eye. It's the light that's emitted from the face. It's the look on someone's face that is most consistent. So people have a difficult time with this idea, as in they don't think it's that valuable. So what? A look on a person's face isn't that big of a deal. You can't read that much into a person's face, but that's really untrue, I think, in person-to-person experience. We all know the look when someone is violently angry. We know when someone ultimately walks into a room and says they're fine, but you can tell by looking at their face they're not. Or in a sexual context, when a person gives you that look and people know, like, they gave me a look, you know, when they're talking about partners, like that person either wants to sleep with me or they're interested in me or they gave me that looking eye or that leering eye. So you want to think the look that human beings give, that anima that comes out of the face that we can't measure, that we can't touch, has tremendous value, especially in the context of face reading. We want to pay attention to this, but reading Shen is the most abstract and intuitive layer of face reading. So that's relevant. That's something to think about. And for people that are not naturally intuitive, that don't buy into intuitive processes in any capacity, reading Shen is going to be the most difficult. It doesn't mean you can't learn, but it is the most difficult. So, with all of that being said, if you look at some of these photos, and I'll cycle a few through here, his eyes have that, they have this lost, wandering look to them. In most of the photos, it was hard to find a photo of him smiling. I only really found one or two where he's smiling. He doesn't emit a lot of joy out of the eyes. He looks apathetic, cold, and distant in most of his photos. And a couple times when he is smiling, he looks kind of sociopathic, and I think he was joking and, you know, probably playing to the camera a bit. But if you look across the board, he has that 1,000-yard stare. And when they talk about this in the context of war, soldiers that come back from battle, when they've had to do very horrible things, they have this 1,000-yard stare where it's this dazed look that just penetrates through a person. And it's almost a numb look to the eyes. And it's because they've usually had to do things. It's almost like the spirit is in shock as a result of what they've had to do in the context of battle. So when we look at his face, he has this look. And, you know, I didn't do a bunch of deep diving into Kurt Cobain's past and his upbringing or any of that. I'm just reading his Shen, and he looks troubled. He looks sad. And most of his photos look like this. It's that long, distant gaze. And so when we look at, you know, how his life ended, that links up to me, you know, that lost, wandering gaze. When people get to a place, you know, suicide, people have to get to a very, very, very dark place of despair with no hope. And there's something in his face that definitely looks like that. From a face reading standpoint, his face lacks fire. There's no joy coming out of the eyes. In the pictures, everything just looks like this penetrating gaze that is sort of empty in a sense. And who knows why that ultimately was. I don't know, you know, his backstory about what that was. But when you look at a person's face and you see a consistency in how the light emits from the face, you do want to read into that. And some people's Shen is very easy to read. Some people's shin is very hard to read. It's going to fluctuate from person to person, but this is what stood out the most when I looked at him. There was something cold, distant, and lost in those eyes. And it's really sad because you think the shin reflects our orientation to the universe, the orientation to our life, the orientation to our existence. And when you see that dull, lost gaze in a person's eyes, this points to what's happening inside of them. What is happening to a person where they are consistently looking like this through the vast majority of their life? And these photos, again, they don't lie. They look really sad. So outside of that, and looking at his shin, he had a very, very dominant jaw and chin. So when we look at the jaw, as I've mentioned many times over, it's the wood element. The wood element, when we see this cut jaw, it also relates to bone structure. Typically a cut jaw, we're going to see a strong constitutional essence. Now, not always the case, but it's one of the markers. And from what I remember, Kurt Cobain, I'm pretty sure, was a pretty heavy drug user. And the people with really strong jing can often get away with that. They can use a lot of their jing through drug use and actually ultimately survive, but that can come at a very real cost down the road. But their bodies can actually handle it better given that constitutional strength. So he had a strong jaw. This relates to the wood, drive, vigor, also anger, frustration. There's lots of themes that go with that strong cut jaw, but drive is one of the big ones, drive and vigor. He's also got this really dominant chin. And so the chin is actually a water feature. In face reading, the chin is not a part of the jaw in the elemental context. The chin itself is about the water element. And the wider and more dominant the chin, the more willpower a person is said to have. It's a very dominant water feature on him, and it's really prominent. He's got a really, really strong, wide chin, and it stands out. He's also got the dimple here, like the little divot here in his chin. That's one of the attention markers, which means people that have that feature usually handle attention well, are going to be in a position where they get a lot of attention, or they want it, or they need it. But in his case, and I don't know how well he handled his fame and his attention. Sometimes that can be a double-edged sword. And it's like these features, when you see them, if they're not tempered well, they could cause problems. So maybe he had this feature, but maybe all that attention really was not good for him. You have to look at the other elements and what would have needed cultivating and what would have needed support in his life to make sure that he was not getting to a darker place as he did get. So strong water feature. Now, when we see that chin, that really strong water element, we want to look at the elemental themes. The water element relates to awe and wonderment on the positive side. So having this awe and wonderment for the great beyond, things that fascinate you and that make you go, make you wonder about life. Now, the dark side of that is fear and panic and dread. And the elemental picture that they paint in the East is, if we have awe and wonderment for the cosmos and for the great beyond, we spend too much time in that space, we can feel infinitesimally small. And that can actually revert into this fear and panic and dread about, oh my God, I'm so inconsequential. I'm so not important. And I wonder, I don't know about Kurt Cobain, but in terms of, that metric going too far in could have contributed to his suicide. I don't know. Again, these are not steadfast things. I didn't know Kurt Cobain. I obviously can't speak with authority about his life, but given how strong that water element is in his chin, it does make me wonder about his life path and his theme. So again, he was a very handsome guy. He was a heartthrob. He had a lot of attention and notoriety, but ultimately something in the shin really seems off. And that's the thing that stands out most about Kurt Cobain. So it's really sad to think about his story and about his life, but he also left a sizable impact in the world through his music. Now, his natural face, his inner persona, and his outer persona, looking at these pictures, I always try to get a picture without shadows because the shadows can really reshape the face, but this was the best I could do. And his inner persona, if you look at it, it's that 1,000-yard cold stare, just icy. There's something cold. And I don't mean that he had a cold heart or that he wasn't friendly, but there's just something not fully turned on. It's like the spirit is not fully present in some way. It just seems so distant and so lost. And then on his public persona side, with the shadows, it's hard to read to a certain degree, but I tried to lighten up the picture a couple times and it didn't really work. But, that face looks a little more intense and a little more, I wouldn't even say angry, but it's just a slightly more intense. And so, I don't think it says much about his, how he was perceived in the external world. The width of his face isn't particularly different from his inner persona to outer persona. So it's not like he had more accessibility on the inner persona side or less accessibility on the public side. It's pretty even. The thing that I'm brought back to across all of those pictures are the eyes. The eyes just have that cold, dull affect lost. And so, again, people have trouble with this, the look on someone's face, as if that means anything. People will get they'll kind of blow it off like that doesn't mean anything. And I would argue that's not the case. We look into people's faces and we read between the lines and we read that light coming out of people's eyes and out of their face, and that has relevance. So this is my read on Kurt Cobain. If there's someone else you'd like me to read, please let me know, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.